And welcome back to RFL. We continue now on our conversation with Syria. And in this segment, it's trying to get the military side of the story. And while everybody can debate the politics here, there still is so many open-ended questions. And we're pleased to be joined by Mike Lyons, veteran of Desert Shield and Desert Storm, a Bronze Star winner, and a NATO veteran as well. Since 2003, he's been a military analyst covering every major military event for a slew of major news outlets. He's kind enough to join us now. Mike, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Many people I've heard say the biggest risk out of all of this is somehow, some way making Assad, putting him in a stronger position than before this even began. Do you think that's a possible consequence?
No, I don't think so. I don't see how he gets stronger. Very clearly, any kind of military strikes will degrade military capability he has there. He's likely doing everything he can right now to protect his assets. He's moving them around, probably moving them to built-up areas in schools, knowing we won't attack them. But that's not to say Syria still will be a very target-rich military environment should the president decide and General Dempsey gets the go-ahead to go ahead and attack inside Syria.
Some people say 3 days, 3 weeks, it won't make a difference. Does delay carry with it military consequences?
Only from the perspective that he'll get to protect certain assets. And again, if we're focused on degrading the chemical weapons that the president seems to be focused on, it's possible that he goes and protects all of those at once. Now, that's not to say we won't go after the Ministry of Defense. We won't go after certain hard targets that clearly can't move. But let's be clear, people will be killed. Our military presence inside of Syria will increase the amount of casualties on the ground there. So if you didn't like the fact that 100,000 are dead, more dead are coming, let's face it. So we'll try to go after only those military targets. Anything else would be illegal from the United States perspective.
And the concern of unintended consequences, and I know a lot of military folks are saying it's as much as the public would like to have a remote control war where you just send some tomahawks and they hit the specific things, we've already made it clear we're not looking for regime change. Would the attacks be more symbolic, or what would really be the intended both targets and hopeful consequences if successful?
Yeah, I hope we're not going to use our military as anything for a symbolic perspective. That just doesn't set a good precedent. And let's be clear, this is an act of war. I mean, you know, the Japanese attacking us December 7, 1941 at Pearl Harbor didn't put any boots on the ground either, and we consider that an act of war. I guarantee it the Syrians will consider this an act of war once those cruise missiles land in their location. So, you know, all of those have got to be considered. There's so many unintended consequences. Russia could send 50,000 troops into Syria. What if Iran sends 20,000 troops to support the Syrian government? What if Syria decides to launch attacks in Israel? What if the Syrian government decides to attack north into Turkey, south into Jordan? They are so many contingencies that the president and the military is going to have to plan for, and we better be ready because all could happen at once.
To that end, Iran seems to be the biggest long-term concern out of this. You've heard some of our debate here. Is there a potential that there could be a misread, well, I'll give it the best case scenario from the White House perspective, that the process to how we're going to get to where we're going to get, that they might read weakness out of the White House?
Yeah, I don't see that. And anybody who perceives the United States to be a paper tiger over this one situation will miscalculate, I think, very quickly. Because we could wake up tomorrow and those cruise missiles have launched. The president doesn't really need that authorization from Congress if something changes on the ground. And if you think of the Middle East as a chessboard, and all really Syria is one, you know, kind of check spot on the board, one square there. Iran plays an important part of this. New regime in Iran, I think it's important to try to create a dialogue for them. Historically, we've always had a back channel to Iran in what has been really the foreign policy failure, the greatest foreign policy failure, I feel, in the last 40 years or so. But let's take it one step at a time. We have to keep these in separate kind of boxes, so to speak, and understand that anything that we do, we can't affect that relationship we could potentially have with Iran or other Middle Eastern countries.
Sure.
You said two things. You said it's an act of war.
Yeah.
Then you said the president doesn't need permission. How is that possible?
Well, Congress declares war. The president can go to war. The president can't stay at war. That's the issue. And so while the president can, again, go to war, the actual declaration of war does come from Congress.
Do you think the president can commit us militarily in a way that makes a war inevitable and yet can do so without congressional approval.
Right.
He absolutely can. I mean,
for 6 months.
for
What is
absolutely,
it, 6 months, I
yeah.
think, or is it a certain amount of time? Then he has to go to Congress.
Right, a president can go to war, can't stay at war. The War
Right.
Powers Act was a result, 1974, a result of what happened in Vietnam.
I was there during the time it was passed.
Yeah, and so again, it's the power of the president, and it allows the commander-in-chief to use that tactical element of surprise, all those important things.
There's a limitation, and that is if the president takes steps that make war inevitable, he can't wait the 6 months.
You know,
But regardless, Syria will view this as an act of war as soon as the first
Absolutely.
missile lands, as
Yeah.
you were saying.
One question, though. What I heard from Congressman Rangel and others, despite every assurance that'll come from both Secretary Kerry, the president, that not one American boot will hit the ground, they said, we've heard it before.
Yeah.
There's Iraq fatigue and there's concerns of mission creep. Legitimate or not?
There sure is, but let's face it, if there was a real existential threat to the United States, we better not have battle fatigue. We better be ready to deploy boots on the ground. But the fact of the matter is, anytime the military is involved, there could be that possibility, and that's where you saw actually in the Senate, the committee meetings today, Secretary Kerry backed away and said, I can't make that guarantee. So he would be foolish to make that guarantee if we said we will never put boots on the ground. You can still never say never from a military perspective.
But Mike, let me ask you, if I'm reading between lines as it relates to you, it's a universally accepted fact, chemical weapons not accepted on the battlefield, they're not accepted certainly to use in a civilian population under any circumstance. Whether you should or shouldn't have said it on a red line, do you think there should be a military consequence for that?
I don't see how it frankly is. The military, a guy named Clausewitz back in the 1800s said, war is an extension of foreign policy by any other matter. And I'm just not sure what if the military, if the nation's objective is to get rid of chemical weapons inside of Syria, I'm just not sure.
Or to create a chilling consequence if they're used.
Well, that's a separate. I'm not sure. Again, the military can create multiple chilling consequences, but fundamentally, shots across the bow. That's really not the intention of the military.
Okay, what if they did it again? What if Assad used it again? Picked another several rounds of Damascus and killed another 1,500 people.
I think from realpolitik perspective, as I look inside, as long as they're not using it against Turkey or using it against Jordan, the situation is horrible. But from a military perspective, for us to get involved, there are so many slippery slopes, and I don't think there's anything in history that shows we're in a similar
One
situation.
argument that a military guy had said to me, I'm sorry if I could, and then Richard, go ahead, is why don't we just basically create air cover here? Let them fight it out. Let them have a civil war here, but at least make it a fair fight. And
Referee a civil war?
not referee a civil war, but at least shut down the airspace over it, so at least you're not going to have death from above. And that, at least, if you wanted to create an environment here where we're not firing bombs or whatever else, but we're at least creating a landscape here where people look at us as...
This is a civil war fought mostly in built-up areas. From a military perspective, very difficult to separate out combatants, non-combatants, really bad guys from good guys. If we instituted a no-fly zone inside of Syria, once again, we'd commit an act of war. We'd be attacking inside of Syria, attacking air defense, known air defense platforms that exist there. We might kill Russian soldiers that are actually working with Syrian soldiers on certain air defense systems. Are we ready to deal with that consequence, going back and saying to the Russians, we're sorry, but we killed a few of your soldiers, but we were trying to kill these guys? Those missiles have no idea who the enemy is once they leave the tube.
Okay, Mike, what about an unintended consequence if we don't act here? And this in some way incentivizes Iran that they want to continue with their nuclear program. That our ally Israel already said will be a non-starter. It will not happen. Aren't we, if not this fight, there'll be another fight? And maybe on a bigger stage?
But that's the history of warfare. We could project that whether or not we do something here or not. So I don't think they're connected. I don't think Iran's nuclear power. That's a separate discussion. I could argue that let Iran have nuclear weapons. Let them have nuclear power. I think that I'm not necessarily they would necessarily use them to launch them against Israel. They want them to keep from being attacked, I think, on some level. But again, from a military perspective, this is a very closed situation that, frankly, I just don't see what our fight is.
What a mess. Huh?
Well, there's no good answer. You're right, you're right, you're right. You can't all be right. You're right.
You mentioned, I'm just curious, the slippery slope in terms of what Syria might do if they're attacked. Do you think all those different options, you said what a mess, all those different options, do you think that could be one of the reasons why the president for lack of a better term, is backing up or is more cautious right now?
I think so. I think he recognized that time was something that really didn't matter once, especially over the weekend, the British Commons decided not to support an attack there. I think that, again, you look at these unintended consequences. Syria attacks into Israel. The real goal, aside from the use of chemical weapons, is just stop the killing, stop the casualties from taking place. Again, any U.S. military intervention, all that's going to do is increase that number.
And let's recall that Saddam Hussein had used chemical weapons against his own people, and we did nothing. The president has committed himself to saying that if chemical weapons are used, something's going to happen, and he's already committed himself.
Well, the best argument is 100,000 people have died in Syria, probably at the end of a gun, and 1,500 people have died because of chemical weapons. Why are we putting a greater standard?
The other thing is we can't go to the UN now because China and Russia are blocking the UN taking any action. Can't go to Britain, so we just have France and the United States.
One quick point. There's a difference between chemical weapon use and chemical weapon exposure. And I still don't believe this administration has come out with proof of chemical weapon use. Clearly there's exposure, but this is a regime that stores chemical weapons inside of schools. Accidents happen. That could have happened there. We've not connected the dots. I'd like to see the report.
But apparently this isn't the only instance of chemical weapons usage. Kerry today testified that there was more than a dozen.
If they establish use, you'd still object.
And Assad is saying
possibly,
that
but that
the
makes the
opposition
argument
has used the chemical weapons. Is that the
That
argument?
could be that. There's a difference between use and exposure. I think part of the problem is that information is coming from Israeli intelligence, and I think we don't want to expose the fact that the Israelis have that much information on what's going on inside of Syria. If it's delivered by an artillery round, every artillery round delivered has a return address. So that's the point. We would know the unit that actually delivered those chemical rounds. I'll bet you Israel know. I bet you we know. We just want to release that data.
I was just going to say, this sounds like a great grounds for a debate that's important and that the United States should be having.
In Congress.
Rich?
Yeah, except, have you been paying attention for the last 5 years? Does Congress really love to have these debates?
No, but they should.
Debating on the facts?
But they should. This is what our Congress is for.
I think the leadership has already spoken. I think he gets the vote.
Yes.
And
The
it's
leadership. He can't
the
lead
leadership
us.
in the Republican
He
and
can't get
Democratic
votes
Party.
on food stamps.
Listen, the leadership of the Republican Democratic Party, he's going to get the support that he needs to do this. It's about what the fallout.
Sure about that?
I'm pretty sure he will.
I was surprised today
It's
to
really
get as
about
many
the
leaders
fallout of what happens after we launch these missiles.
Mike,
That's what I'm
thank you
afraid.
very much.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it, and I'm even more convinced how much of a mess it is. All right, we take a quick break. When we come back here, Dominic's got to explain this to me. How, with a week left in the mayoral primary, all of a sudden Bill de Blasio is closer to avoiding here an actual runoff here than his competitors are even getting into one. We'll talk about that more after this.